Okay, I continue my video on Robert Bork's unsuccessful Supreme Court nomination. So already on the same day, July the 1st, 1987, when President Reagan had announced Judge Bork's nomination to the US Supreme Court, one of Reagan's and Bork's most partisan Democratic critic, Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, declared on the Senate floor, "Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back alley abortions, blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters, rogue police could break down citizens' doors in midnight raids, and school children could not be taught about evolution, writers and artists could be censored at the whim of the government, and the doors of the federal courts would be shut on the fingers of millions of citizens." And just 4 days later, on July the 5th, 1987, the National Advancement Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples Executive Director Benjamin Hooks claimed that they would fight Bork's nomination all the way until hell freezes over and then we'll skate across on the ice. Robert Bork himself condemned Senator Kennedy's Senate speech, claiming that it was totally inaccurate. However, it did work. It helped to galvanize the liberal and democratic opposition to Bork's nomination. US Senator Joseph Biden of Maryland then prepared a brief, since he was serving as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, called the Biden Report. Bork later accused in his book The Tempting of America, the senator who would then serve as US Vice President under Barack Obama, of thoroughly misrepresenting his plain record. He even claimed that his record easily qualified as world-class. The report, Biden's report, easily qualified as world-class in the category of scurrility. TV ads produced by People for the American Way and narrated by Gregory Peck attacked Bork as extremist. A hotly contested United States Senate debate over Bork's nomination ensued, partly fueled by strong opposition by civil and women's rights groups concerned with Bork's stated desire to roll back civil rights decisions of the Warren and Burger courts, and his opposition to the federal government's right to impose standards of voting fairness upon the states. He is still one of only 3 Supreme Court nominees ever to be opposed by the American Civil Liberties Union. William Rehnquist and Samuel Alito are the others. William Rehnquist served first as the US Supreme Court's Associate Justice from 1972 to 1986, and then as the Supreme Court's Chief Justice from 1986 until his death in 2005, and Samuel Alito is currently serving as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Bork was also criticized for being an advocate of disproportionate powers for the executive branch of government, almost executive supremacy, as demonstrated allegedly by his role in the Saturday Night Massacre of late October 1973 during Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal. Because Richard Nixon had ordered Attorney General or Justice Minister Elliot Richardson to dismiss the Watergate Special Independent Prosecutor Archibald Cox for having demanded the tape-recorded White House conversations of President Nixon. Nixon cited executive privilege and national security in refusing that request for quite many months. Rather than obey Nixon, Richardson resigned, as he did his Deputy Attorney General or Assistant Attorney General William Ruckelshaus, and only Robert Bork, as the Solicitor General of the United States, the U.S. Justice Department's third highest ranking official, and as the Acting Attorney General, somewhat reluctantly carried out the order. As a minor issue during the debate over his nomination, Bork's video rental history was leaked to the press, but it revealed nothing remarkable. Bork strongly believed that the US Constitution, as he interpreted it, and as the other strict constructionists and originalists interpreted it, contained no generalized right to privacy. For that reason, partly because of his religious beliefs and partly also because of his knowledge of the fetal pain, he opposed abortion. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Joseph Biden presided over Bork's hearing. Biden stated his opposition to Bork soon after the nomination, reversing an approval in an interview of a hypothetical Bork nomination he had made in 1986, and angering conservatives who thought he could not conduct the hearings dispassionately. However, Biden won praise for conducting the proceedings fairly and with good humor and courage. On October the 6th, 1987, the Senate Judiciary Committee rejected Bork's nomination by a 9-5 vote, given the fact that the Democrats did not have even 60 seats out of 100 in the US Senate. At the time, it meant that at least one or two Republicans voted with them to reject or to recommend that the full Senate reject Bork's nomination. On October the 9th, Bork announced, "There should be a full debate and a final Senate decision. In deciding on this course, I harbor no illusions. But a crucial principle is at stake. That principle is the way we select the men and women who guard the liberties of all the American people. That should not be done through public campaigns of distortion. If I withdraw now, that campaign would be seen as a success, and it would be mounted against future nominees. For the sake of the federal judiciary and the American people, that must not happen. The deliberative process must be restored." 2 weeks later, on October the 23rd, 1987, the full Senate rejected Bork's nomination, as had already been expected. 42 senators voted in favor of it and 58 voted against. This vote largely followed the party lines. Only 2 Democratic senators, David Boren of Oklahoma and Ernest Hollings of South Carolina, voted in favor, with 6 Republican senators voting against. John Chafee of Rhode Island, Robert Packwood of Oregon, Arlene Specter of Pennsylvania, who would later switch parties, Robert Stafford of Vermont, John Warner of Virginia, and Lowell Weicker Jr. of Connecticut. And eventually, a sufficiently centrist and non-controversial Judge Anthony Kennedy was appointed and confirmed to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court as its Associate Justice. Since he recently announced his retirement from the court, Brett Kavanaugh is now on the hot seat, being faced with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who claims that in 1982 he sexually assaulted her while they were both high school students. Disappointed over the confirmation process, in 1988, Robert Bork then resigned from the U.S. Circuit Court of Washington, D.C. He then turned to writing books, although he was for several years both a professor at George Mason University School of Law and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, a Washington, D.C. based think tank. He also consulted for Netscape in the Microsoft litigation. He was a fellow at the Hudson Institute. He served later as a visiting professor at the University of Richmond School of Law and was a professor at Ave Maria School of Law in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Incidentally, both the late Judge Bork and the current nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, are Roman Catholics, or Judge Bork was a Roman Catholic. He passed away, and Kavanaugh, who is still alive, is a Roman Catholic. In 2011, Bork worked as a legal advisor for the presidential campaign of Republican Mitt Romney. He wrote several books, including the two bestsellers, The Tempting of America, about his judicial philosophy and his nomination battle, and a deeply pessimistic Slouching Towards Gomorrah, Modern Liberalism and American Decline, in which he argued that the rise of the New Left in the 1960s in the United States undermined the civil society's necessary moral standards and spawned a generation of intellectuals who oppose Western civilization. During the period these books were written, as well as for most of his adult life, Bork was, interestingly enough, an agnostic. In other words, he did not state that he surely believed in God. So I withdraw my earlier remark that he opposed abortion for religious reasons. He opposed it because he believed that the fetuses suffer pain in the abortion process, and because, in his opinion, the U.S. Constitution does not contain a generalized right to privacy under whose purview the abortion rights would fall. In 2003, he published Coercing Virtue, the Worldwide Rule of Judges. He also advocated modifying the Constitution to allow congressional supermajorities to override Supreme Court decisions, similar to the Canadian notwithstanding clause. And it wasn't until 2003 that he converted to Roman Catholicism. His last published work during his life was A Time to Speak, Selected Writings and Arguments, which had been preceded by his edited book published in 2005, A Country I Do Not Recognize, The Legal Assault on American Values. Posthumously, in 2013, was published his book Saving Justice, Watergate, The Saturday Night Massacre and Other Adventures of a Solicitor General.